Have you ever set your daughter's hair on fire? I'm afraid that's just an occupational hazard when it comes to Advent traditions from Northern Europe. Good morning, this is Pastor Ryan Stout over here at St. Peter's Lutheran Church, and this is our weekly Faith 5 reflection. Now, in this season of Advent, I like to do something a little different than going through the gospel readings for Sunday. Last week, I talked about St. Nicholas of Myra, that is, the original real-life Santa Claus, because everyone loves Santa Claus. Come on. This upcoming Sunday is another rather remarkable Advent saint who is celebrated especially in Sweden and parts north, Saint Lucy or Sankta Lucia. Now, my wife's family is Norwegian in origin, and I've got a little Scandinavian on the stout side, what with those Danes in the UK and some Swedes associated with the north of Germany. Sankta Lucia is a tradition for the eldest daughter in a given household to wreath her head with lit candles and in the wee hours of December 13th serve saffron buns and peppercorn, that is, thin spiced cookies, to the rest of the family in bed. Where on earth does this tradition come from? Well, much like Santa Claus has his historical kernel of truth in the legends of St. Nicholas, so the traditions of Sancta Lucia do germinate around an actual historical character, or at least a well-established legend from the early church. St. Lucy was a very young Christian in Sicily who was martyred for her faith. And a lot of the legends associated with her martyrdom have to do with sight, with eyes, which is thematically appropriate because Lucy or Lucia means light, vision, yes? Just as Christ is the light of the world. Some of the more gruesome stories are that she put out her eyes or had them put out because she refused to marry a pagan suitor. She had dedicated her life to Christ as a sort of proto-nun, and she was killed for it. But the stories go that her sight was restored. Either the eyes miraculously regenerated, or she was able to see without them. This leads to some rather creepy statues of her in Italy and parts around the Mediterranean. So what on earth does an early Christian martyr from Sicily have to do with Sweden and the Nordic countries where she is so very, very popular? Well, the story goes that in the Middle Ages there was a port city in Sweden during a conflict that was essentially barricaded, embargoed, so that no food could get to the city. In the Scandinavian countries, it is often very difficult, especially in earlier eras it was very difficult, to travel from place to place by land. There's a lot of mountains, there's a lot of forests, and so the highway of the day was, of course, the sea. If your city was cut off from utilizing the water, you didn't have the supplies that you needed. You didn't have the food to feed your population. Well, the tale goes that the blockade, I should say, was broken on December 13th, Santa Lucia Day, and a food-laden ship was seen coming into port with a woman dressed in white, blazing with light on the prow. And when the ship came into port, the miraculous woman vanished, and the city was saved, and there was food enough for all. I should say that part of the Sicilian legends of Santa Lucia is that she would bring food to the Christians hiding in catacombs under the city, and in order to have her hands free to carry bread, she would place lit tapers on her head, a wreath of flames of light. And so the fact that this miracle story occurred on St. Lucy's Day, that she was already associated with bringing light to darkness and food to the hungry, just sort of clicked. And from then on, she was the sort of saint par excellence for the darkened wilds of Northern Europe. Even when the Protestant Reformation came through and the Catholic countries became Lutheran, they still didn't lose all their saints, especially Sankta Lucia, who was their favorite. Now, there has been a great deal of speculation that Sankta Lucia has been sort of melded together in syncretism with a pre-existent pagan goddess of light in the north. Now, it is true that countries of Northern Europe did have a tendency to personify winter as a woman. It wasn't necessarily a unified tradition. There was a lot of variety in it. The Scottish, for example, talked about, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, the Cailleach, who was an old crone, an elderly woman who was the coming of winter and its sort of the aging and death associated thereby, and those hungry times when food stores were depleted. In Germany, as you may have read in my pastor's epistle for this December, there was a character in folklore in the Grimm's tales called Frau Holle, or Perchta in the south, and she came in many guises. She could be a young woman, she could be a kindly old grandmother, or she could be a wicked crone who was really more of an ogress. And she is quite possibly a personification of Epiphany, a Christian festival that heralds both the joy of Christmas. Twelfth night was often the biggest of the Christmas parties of the season, but also the long, hard dark of winter. And so this notion of a woman who brings both bounty and joy, but also death and scarcity, two sides of the same coin, became Frau Holle or Perchta in Germany. Does Santa Lucia up in Scandinavia have anything to do with these pre-Christian notions? Maybe. It's all speculation. One of the more interesting details is that those saffron buns that I talked about that are traditionally served on Sankta Lucia's day, they're called Lucicatter, which is Lucy's Cats. I personally do not know of any association between Lucy and cats from Sicily, from the early church. People have pointed out that Freya or Frigga, goddesses of the Germanic Norse pantheons, they were associated with cats. And so perhaps some of the properties of these Viking goddesses have been grafted onto this beloved Christian saint. Maybe. It is speculation. Truly, people are guessing. We know about the early stories of Lucy. We do not know any details about pre-existing Christian goddesses like Lucy, a goddess of light in the midst of darkness, a goddess of plenty in the midst of cold and famine. We're largely guessing. In many ways, I don't think it matters. We are told in Scripture, test all things and keep the good. If there are traditions that predate the coming of Christianity and they are good traditions, there is no reason that we cannot take them along with us into the church. All Christians are converts after all, and all Christian traditions, or darn near all of them, have pre-Christian roots, either in Judaism or in other festivals. Come Christmas, everybody likes to talk about how Christmas and Easter and all the major Christian festivals are pagan. It's not true. If anything, they're Jewish, right? Easter, Pascha, Passover especially, it's clearly a Christian reinterpretation, some would say fulfillment, of a Jewish holiday. Likewise, the date of Christmas was clearly chosen because of internal church debates about when Christ was born. And in fact, there's a line of scholarship indicating that it might be associated with Hanukkah, which begins on the 25th of Kislev, the Hebrew month associated with December. I'm getting off topic. My point is, there was a historic Sankta Lucia. She is associated with light and food and generosity, which made her sort of a ready-made fit for Sweden in the middle of the darkest days of winter, because indeed her feast day falls on or near what used to be reckoned as the winter solstice, the longest, darkest night of the year. And who doesn't want a goddess or a saint bearing light and treats and celebration in the midst of darkness and hunger and the usual seasonal gloom that one associates with the long dark of winter? Now, as I said, the tradition for Sankta Lucia is to have the eldest daughter of the house, for us that's our middle child, get up early in the morning before dawn, which isn't a problem, right? In Minnesota in the middle of winter. Get up before dawn, wear a crown of candles. We've got electric versions, we're cheating. And have her serve spiced cookies and saffron buns to the rest of the family in bed. Now, honestly, I'm the one who usually sets my alarm for 5, gets up, makes some kind of baked goodie, be they scones or orange rolls or what have you. We haven't done the straight up saffron buns yet. We might try those this year. And once it's all baked, I get Anna up. I dress her in a little white alb, put the candles on her head. And then there is a very traditional Sankta Lucia hymn song that pretty much anyone from Sweden or Norway or Denmark would know by heart. And Anna got sick of that song. She thought it was kind of cheesy. So I found a more fun version by Jonah Jinton, who is a singer and does a lot of kulning, which is Scandinavian cattle calls. Doesn't sound terribly romantic, but trust me, they're beautiful. Found on YouTube a more modern version that Jonah Jinton has done, and it's called Light in the Darkness on YouTube if you want to Google it. And the lyrics to this traditional Lucia song, or at least one version of it, I'm going to read to you here. I think they're quite lovely, quite haunting. Translated into English, it's: Night walks with a heavy step round yard and hearth. As the sun departs from earth, shadows are brooding. Dreams of wings rustling over us in prophecy. Light your white candles, Sankta Lucia. Spells and dark powers with light you subject. Guard of the blessed flames, protection for us brings. Dreams of wings rustling over us in prophecy. Light your white candles, Sankta Lucia. Stars that lead us to find the way become your clear flares, fair priestess. Dreams of wings rustling over us in prophecy. Light your white candles, Sankta Lucia. Dreams of wings rustling over us in prophecy. Light your white candles, Sankta Lucia. By the by, if you are a fan of literature, Dante's Divine Comedy, you may recall that Dante's salvation in that epic poem is worked at least in part through the intercession of Sankta Lucia, Saint Lucy. As for other children on Sankta Lucia Day, if you dress up your eldest daughter as the saint herself, oftentimes sons can go as star boys and other daughters as angels. You know, it's not easy being the middle child. You're not the eldest, you're not the youngest. But once a year, our middle child, Sankta Lucia, darn it. And I think she kind of loves that. And it's a little something special that we can share as a family. One of the best things about Advent and about Christmas to follow is that it's all about taking the sacred, taking the holy into our homes. And I think that is a lesson for all Christians to pay close attention to. Not only in the season of darkness when we embrace the light of Christ and the abundance of the feast to come, but throughout the entire year. The religion that sticks with us is the religion of the family, the religion of the home. And our communal gatherings on Sunday and the ministry of your pastor, well, those all exist to support what Luther called the bishop and bishopess of the house. That is husband and wife, father and mother, and the little church that is your home. I don't think there could be a better image as we prepare ourselves for Christmas Day. Go in peace, serve the Lord, and thanks be to God.